Maybe first of all, say it's really a tremendous pleasure to welcome back to CNS our speaker today, Professor Mansung Yim. Professor Yim is the new director of the Center for Nuclear Security Science and Policy Initiatives in the Department of Nuclear Engineering at Texas A&M University. It's a mouthful, but we're accustomed to that given the fact that we are the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. So we have at least a competitor in terms of the name here. Before taking up his post at Texas A&M, he was a professor in the Department of Nuclear and Quantum Engineering and the founding director of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Education and Research Center at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, KAIST. You have long names here, Mansung. I had the opportunity to lecture at what I believe was the first KAIST summer school, which was a very impressive gathering of young people from around the world, most of whom had a technical background. And I should mention that we actually have two alumni from your summer, at least two. There may be more online, but two of your alumni are with us. One is a regular staff member, and one is a very promising young scholar in the field. And I know they both benefited tremendously from this very, very interesting program that you launched in Korea. Perhaps what impressed me most about Professor Yim was that when he came here for the first time, now 15 years ago, I was astonished and impressed that he actually was familiar with the first book that I wrote, Nuclear Power and Non-Proliferation, an Interdisciplinary Perspective, and actually used it in one of his engineering courses, which for a political scientist is something that is remarkable. And I like to think at least could be attributed to the staying power of this very early study. So I think it's only fitting that upon your return here, that you are speaking on a related topic, Mansung, the issue of nuclear power and nuclear weapons, examining the connection. And so hopefully it's not going to poke too many holes in the book that I wrote long ago. I should say that we're particularly delighted to have Professor Yim with us because we've been talking about how we might better collaborate, tapping the excellence that Texas A&M has in the nuclear engineering field. I mean, it's the largest program of its kind in the country, if not in the world, and the work that we do at CNS and at MPTS in Monterey in the policy sphere. And so I'm also really delighted. I think Sig Hecker is also on the call with us. We've been kind of talking about this for some time, but now that we have Professor Yim in place, we're going to make something happen. So I'm delighted that we have a number of our faculty from the MPTS program here as well. So I'm going to give you the floor. I'm going to relocate here so you have more room to maneuver as you lecture, but we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you. So it's my distinct pleasure and privilege to be back here in front of a very distinguished audience, including the digital audience we have today. As Bill said, I was here maybe 2009 to give a talk on something related to this topic. So this means I've been sort of interested in this topic for years. Although I'm an engineer by training, I'm a nuclear engineer. To survive in nuclear engineering programs, I have to do technical, hardcore nuclear engineering work. But I maintained some interest in this problem and then made some continuous effort in this one. So you can see over the 15 years how I have evolved in this field as well. Also, it's a great pleasure to see Ariel and Yang-Ling and some of the people in the audience to remain in this area and just making contributions and so on. So they all become very, including all other audience members here, I think you will become all very important part of this community. And as we all know, this community is very small, so we stay connected and work with each other and make things happen or make things different to make a really something substantive for the world as we're now heading into more uncertain period. When I first came here, it was Elena Skova, who is now directing the VCNDP in Vienna. She invited me to come here, and then that's how I got to know Professor Powder, and then I think this relationship started. Hopefully this time, I'm coming back to this side of the world, I may have a real opportunity to start something substantive here with Monoway. So as we all know, these days, nuclear power is getting a lot of attention. Yes. Electrons are slow, so I think I need to be a little bit patient. Because of the concern of greenhouse gas, global climate change, and COP28, I think global leaders got together and said, we will triple the use of nuclear power in their respective countries, which is great news for, I think, people working in this industry. But then, okay, so we have maybe a new wave of interest, new wave of countries who wants to embark on this journey, nuclear power. But then that reminds of the first wave, initial Atoms for Peace initiative initiated by United States government. And that will open up opportunities at the same time, creating challenges to the global community. And from 1954 to 1973, many countries wanted to have nuclear power. I won't get into the details of nuclear non-proliferation or this one, but that's not the focus. And many of you are probably more than an expert in this area. But I think with the proclamation of Atoms of Peace initiative, many countries wanted to join this bandwagon and then wanted to have nuclear power. So here are the list of countries, 57 countries. But then until 1973, many of these countries, or even beyond, even today, many of these countries didn't have a single operating nuclear power. So you can imagine from this chart, the countries with red color is one who started their effort on the IAEA assistance, but today doesn't have nuclear power. And some countries managed to have nuclear power colored in black. But along the way, some countries also had dual interest and pursued that dual interest and successful by developing their own nuclear weapons capability. So India, Pakistan. And then I think Israel is, I don't have the star here. Basically, the countries with star means the country who pursued also along the way nuclear weapons, but then gave up. Countries who continued the work and then they succeeded in acquiring functional nuclear weapon. They are not basically given the star. So, I mean, simply speaking, there are countries who pursued nuclear power at the same time, nuclear weapons. And some of them succeeded, some of them didn't. One interesting fact from this slide is also, it's maybe very difficult to have nuclear power. More than maybe 2/3 of the country on this list do not have nuclear power. So it really makes us wonder, why is it so difficult? So this means maybe many countries who are raising their hand saying that we want to have nuclear power may not be successful. But at the same time, this history tells us some of those countries may have a dual interest. They have an ulterior motivation. And then that may be a new wave of things that we may observe in the years to come. Again, this is something that many of you are very familiar. History of nuclear proliferation. According to Singh and Wei's classification, we have explore, pursue, and acquire 3 different stages. And then total of 31 countries represented on this one. 17 of them went on and pursued nuclear weapon. And then 10 of them succeeded, including the weapon states. But then South Africa stopped. But anyway, I think out of this list, again, I think the question is, what is the role of nuclear power in this? Is nuclear power a substantive part of the pursuit of nuclear weapons? Today, this is again something you're very familiar. Now we have 5 nuclear weapon states, according to NPT. We have nuclear armed state, India, North Korea, Pakistan, and then Israel, a country with nuclear weapon, but no official declaration. I think it was not necessarily, they didn't want to, it was US government who pushed them not to announce it officially, so it became opaque policy. But then there are countries who possess and then gave up on weapons. And then there are nuclear weapon sharing countries. Good thing that we don't really have like 30 countries as President Kennedy one time predicted. We don't have many countries, but then this may stay this way, or the future is somewhat very uncertain with many countries coming into this, I think, game of developing nuclear capability. So now again, nuclear weapon 101, you want to have a nuclear materials. To build nuclear weapons capability, you want to have a materials capability, you want to have a detonation capability, and you want to have a delivery capability, but most fundamentally, you have the nuclear materials. So nuclear weapon reusable materials are something called fissile, or there are some other materials that can be fissionable, but then depending on how sophisticated your nuclear materials program is, you can work with very good fissile materials, or you can even work with some dirty materials. And I think we have an expert sitting in the audience who can talk a lot more on this one. We'll skip that part. But then bottom line is, where do we get these materials? Well, you get it through what we call enrichment of uranium, which is naturally available, but only 235, about 0.78% of them are available. You have to enrich to the level that you want to have for the weapons production. So enrichment of uranium-235 is one way. Or you want to have plutonium, typically plutonium-239. Again, you have to separate it from spent nuclear fuel coming out from nuclear reactor. So enrichment and reprocessing has been the way. Or you divert, theft, basically steal or seize or purchase of those materials. So in all these things, civilian nuclear power program can be connected to this acquiring nuclear materials. It's something I think we are very familiar with. So when I was a student in nuclear engineering, I went to school in Korea, Seoul National University nuclear engineering program. And then when we were studying nuclear engineering, all of our professors were saying we have nothing to do with nuclear weapons. What we do here has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. And we were told that way, I thought, and I believe in that way. So I grew up in that culture. And then 1989, I was traveling to Germany as part of my project. And then somebody came up and asked me, why are you doing this evil technology? Oh, I was a simple-minded nuclear engineer. Why do you call me an evil person? So that, but then triggered interest in my mind. Why does he call me evil? At that point, I switched my field. I wanted to do something different. It's a long story, but I will not get into the details. So I left nuclear engineering, and I, from that point on, wanted to ask the questions about how nuclear technology can be responsibly or safely or peacefully managed. And is there something I can do? That's basically the question I've been asking for the last maybe 30 some years. So that's part of the reason why I'm giving this talk today. So as you again very well much aware of, a nuclear weapon, it comes from the nuclear fuel cycle, the nuclear materials from enrichment or reprocessing of materials. I will not get into the details. The problem is this enrichment and reprocessing is part of a civilian nuclear fuel cycle. There is a disconnection. So now with this potential new second wave of nuclear power interest, we are coming back to this question, what is the connection? And I think Steve Herzog, one of our professors here, he's even examining this question from the perception point of view. The perception of nuclear weapon, perception of nuclear power, does it have a connection? How does it affect each other? I'm not examining that point yet. I may have some interest in that, but I'm looking at more the fundamental question: does the capability, nuclear power capability, increase the risk of proliferation, or what? So some of you may be again very familiar with this work. There have been a school of people saying that this increase of capability or spread of this capability will increase the risk. John Holdren, I think his somewhat influential piece at Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in 1983 said nuclear power weapons there is a connection, that connection is dangerous. I think Gilinski here, again, one of the people who really made a very strong point on this one, said there is this call to resist this nuclear revival because of this connection. And then I think with a revival of interest in this issue, especially with quantitative examinations, Matt Koenig or Matt Furman, Jeffrey Kaflow, all these people have examined this issue and then quantitatively demonstrated that nuclear power is directly connected to nuclear weapons development. So spread of nuclear power is not a good thing. It's causing problems. Basically you're sowing seed for problems that will come in the future. Even some people in Europe examined the issue of this civilian power versus vertical proliferation. And they claim that this very active civilian nuclear power program is a prompt, basically, foundation for the vertical nuclear proliferation and so on. So there is, even for the vertical aspects of proliferation, there is a strong linkage. Well, more recent examination by, again, very prominent young scholars in this field said the opposite. The capability decreases risk. Spread of nuclear power is not increasing the risk. So Mark Bell is saying that peaceful nuclear assistance is not a significant factor that leads to nuclear proliferation. Nicholas Miller, I think he indicated nuclear assistance increases the likelihood of nuclear weapons program to be detected or increase the costliness. So nuclear energy program really leads to proliferation. And then I think Gibbons even goes further, saying that offer of nuclear assistance has done far more to bolster global nuclear non-proliferation efforts than recent research suggests. So then I think if we listen to all these things, you kind of have to wonder, when somebody says something and somebody is something, so who do we believe? This is just an example of Mark Bell's, I think, research work, basically indicating civilian nuclear power program is not a significant factor in explaining the proliferation behavior. In fact, I think he said many of the variables that the political scientists came up with as a meaningful determinants of proliferation are not really important in predicting the behavior of countries. By using, I think in this case, he's using one of the statistical learning models and then examining this using random forest, and then basically indicating the difficulty in coming up with the meaningful predictions of behavior. But then as a recap, the connection is expressed depending on what you believe. Realist has said expansion of nuclear capability is the key variable that ultimately determines proliferation or instance of proliferation. And then idealist or liberalist said perception of bomb and then the symbols it carries is the key variable that determines the instance of proliferation. So depending on your worldview, depending on what you believe, the connection is interpreted in different ways. I'm sure you are maybe familiar with this and then agree on this observation. So again, this is a source from Richard Stoll, latency capacity proliferation model. According to realist view, we should have a lot more countries, but in reality, we don't have that. So again, this connection is not as pessimistic as people thought. That connection has somehow not really led to the massive propagation or proliferation of this weapons technology. If we just look at, by the way, I am told that I'm supposed to talk maybe like 45 minutes and then have time to, Q&A. So I put many slides, so I may just sort of write some of the slides. So instead of going through all the details, I list some countries who pursued and acquired nuclear weapons, pursued but then stopped nuclear weapons. So these are the countries who pursued and acquired nuclear weapons. Do they use civilian nuclear power? The answer is some did, some didn't. Many of them prefer to have a dedicated nuclear weapon program, but doesn't mean that some countries did not even bother with a civilian nuclear power program. They did have a dual track approach. The same thing with these countries who pursued the nuclear weapon at the pursue level. Yugoslavia, South Korea, Libya, Brazil, Iran, Iraq, Syria. Again, some of the countries have used civilian nuclear power as a cover to pursue their secret nuclear weapons program. So although many countries in this list, maybe more countries pursue the secret dedicated nuclear weapons program, but there are some countries who did have civilian nuclear power program as a cover or conduit to access the technology, to access the knowledge and so on. So if you, just in case interested in, there are some literatures, this is a classic example of saying that capability increase the risk. So this is 2014 volume. I think people who are in this area knows the people in this in this volume, people who are very prominent against the spread of nuclear power, I think have led this effort. But then American Physical Society, they've also looked at this issue. And then from a technical point of view, they said, it's not really nuclear reactors that's really providing this seed. It is the fuel cycle. The reactor itself is not really proliferation risk, but then the fuel cycle, the associated activities with enrichment and reprocessing is the potential concern. And then National Academy of Science or National Research Council came out with this also statement, nuclear power plants themselves are not proliferation risk, but nuclear fuel cycle technologies are a concern. So I think that's a fair statement from a technical point of view. But then, does it mean that nuclear power reactors are clean and we don't need to worry about nuclear power plant at all if there is no fuel cycle activity associated with it? And I don't know, this is sort of a kind of a humor I wanted to add here. Depending on how you look at the world, depending on how you see things, you interpret things differently. This is how we all behave. So are you a Hermite? Are you a hierarchist? Are you an egalitarian? Depending on the worldview, the way you see things and the way you see things, and then the issue of acceptance of risk can be in a very different way. So I thought maybe the reason why people have different interpretation of this examination or connection has something to do with their worldviews. I think some people tend to be egalitarian. They do really care about the risk, and they want to do anything or everything they want to do to minimize the risk, unless there is a very strong connection to protect the people. But then some people say this is fact of life. We just have to auto accept it. Or some people say it depends on the benefits. So I think the fact that there are different interpretation on this connection, in a sense, is obvious because humans are different. We are all very different people. Idiosyncrasy of human nature maybe interprets things differently. But if we just say there and stay there, that's probably a very somewhat uncomforting way of concluding this question, is there a connection? Especially now with many countries, like more than 30 countries interested in nuclear power as a newcomer country. So this is in work by Matt Furman. He examined this issue of nuclear power program, civilian nuclear power program, how it leads to potentially the weapons-related activities. So you have a technology know-how, technical capability that reduces the expected cost of nuclear weapons program. At the same time, that capability creates an environment or culture among the bureaucrats that then maybe we ought to take advantage of this capability that we have already established by spending enough of our national resources. So those combination of those factors are pushing government decision-making toward nuclear weapons development. But then this does not include the aspects of what happened along the way. If you really want to pursue that goal, is that simple enough? The answer is no. We have, as a global international community, have learned enough from the history, starting from Indian nuclear explosion, and then Gulf War, and then whatever happened with North Korea. All those activities, basically, or instance and episode, prompted global community to be better prepared, covering the loopholes, and then have a better regime to address potential challenges. So I think that doesn't really address just for the complete, not completeness, but I wanted to put some of the slide that has been, I think, touching on this issue. This is Scott Sagan's slide from 2009. He also examined the histories of nuclear power countries and their decision in relation to the regime type. So this slide basically telling us any state who ratifies NPT as a democratic state don't proliferate, even if you have all the capabilities in nuclear power and so on. So it matters whether you are a democratic state or not. But then as an engineer coming into this field and being exposed to this question, so I'm asking this question myself. So this argument, this dialogue has been going on. Is there something I can do? And then I started my interest in developing tools because in my research as an engineer, I've been developing tools, models, predictive capabilities, system behaviors, and so on. So again, well, in this field, can we come up with a predictive capability to understand what is going on in a state? So I started that kind of activity maybe 2003, 4, 5. And then the seminar I gave in 2009 here was related to that, developing maybe predictive capability. So out of those activities, I published some papers, and also this paper examined the issue of examining the relationship between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. One simple message from here is, if you want to have a successful nuclear power program, let me take it back. So if you have an interest in nuclear weapons, but at the same time pursue nuclear power program, initially that maybe have maybe some symbiotic relationship. But if you become more serious, right, beyond explore stage, you go further to the pursue stage, your effort in developing this nuclear weapons capability will hamper your effort in having successful nuclear power program. Basically, that paper is telling that from statistical analysis. We also examined this question from just purely historical data. So here, this slide shows the maybe not relationship, but evolution of governments or nations' capability, we call latency, and then the government's decision to pursue nuclear weapons. Here it's called level. So this right-hand side, the level is, again, explore, pursue, acquire. This left-hand side, latency, this latency 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, indicates differences in the progression of government's capability in having technical capability toward maybe weapons-related development. So 0 means nothing, 1 means maybe you have a reactor, whether it is research reactor or commercial power reactor. 2 means you have a maybe initial construction of fuel cycle capability, like enrichment. 3 means maybe you have an operating small, sort of a small scale power plant, the facility for enrichment. And then 5 is like more, 4 is more like mature upscale, scaled up facility. Anyway, so you looked at all the changes in their nuclear capability in terms of latency and also government's interest in pursuing nuclear weapons. So here is Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and so on, Yugoslavia, Romania. And then you also have Japan, Pakistan, South Korea, Taiwan, Algeria, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and then you have India, Pakistan, and South Africa. Again, I don't want to, yes.
Just a quick question. So the vertical axis is both latency and proliferation levels.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
Blue line is the level, meaning.
Oh, I got it. Okay, yeah.
Blue line is government interest in nuclear weapons.
Yep.
And then red line is this
The degree of
nuclear
latency on
latency
this scale.
capability.
Okay, yeah. Sorry,
And then this yellow is When did they start having commercial nuclear power program? So I don't know if I'm not giving you enough time, but the country who started their commercial nuclear power program don't proliferate usually. In other words, even if they had explore or pursue, but then once you have an operating nuclear power plant, you don't go beyond to acquire nuclear weapon, except this country, South Africa, Pakistan, India. Anyway, we haven't published this paper, but this is simply a depiction of what happened in the past. So again, well, the relationship between nuclear power versus nuclear weapon, it's not very as simple as what we think, but then there is a relationship. The civilian power versus nuclear weapon, there is a relationship. So this is a piece that we're expecting to have published very soon in NPR, Non-Proliferation Review. So nuclear latency, nuclear power, and nuclear proliferation, again, development with their latency levels, and then how many of them pursue, how many of them explore. And then we distinguish between without nuclear power operation and with nuclear power operation. Again, you can see a difference. If you have nuclear power plant operation, then your pursuit of the latency and then pursuit of maybe more serious nuclear weapons development is showing very different result. We also did large analysis of those countries, and then latency level 1, 2, 3, 4, again, more serious development in the capability for weaponization of materials. And then the end power is number of nuclear power plants. I mean, basically, you have a successful nuclear power plant operation. For explore and then pursue. And then I have different models here, different models to test the robustness of this analysis. But here, basically, full model is basically the one that we want to look at. The point is, this nuclear power operation has negative relationship with all the decision, explore, pursue in this case. This is something potentially published very soon. So once it's out, I think, especially those people who are here, access with NPR, you can take a look at more details. But this is not the focus of my talk, so I'm just flipping through the slide. So again, now I've come to the, in a sense, main part of my talk. So we have these countries, newcomer country, who had never had nuclear power, but embarking on this journey. We have more than 30 countries. So green means they're going ahead, and then black means they're still not quite sure, but if there's strong interest. Yellow, they pursued and then stopped, but then thinking again, red means after Fukushima, they decided not to pursue. But then we have plenty of countries, especially in Africa, Middle East, and so on, sort of somewhat sensitive areas, wants to develop nuclear power capability. If we compare their government capabilities, characteristics in terms of political stability, governance effectiveness, corruption pervasiveness, and then regulatory quality, you see a very different picture. Meaning, these newcomer countries are very different kind of countries compared to the countries who currently own nuclear power. So that they will be very capable in handling this technology. They will be able to have a very safe and responsible management of this technology. We're not sure. There may be even opportunities for this development to be taken advantage of by subnational state threats or other entities, basically for their ulterior motivations and so on. Again, we're comparing those two groups in terms of NTI's nuclear security score, UN Security Council Security homework, and then terrorism risk. Again, we see a big difference. So that's where, again, another question comes in. Even though we have a very many countries interested in nuclear power, maybe the second wave of nuclear power development could have different characteristics. Again, showing some of their commitment of this country in terms of the regime. This was done in 2015, and then this was done in 2020, and there are some differences, changes highlighted by yellow. But many of the countries who wants to have nuclear power are not strong stewards of international regime. In other words, their commitment to non-proliferation, export control, nuclear security is not as strong as, again, the nuclear power countries. So with weak governance characteristics, with maybe potentially questionable commitment to non-proliferation or other non-proliferation norms, what the world would become, how the world would evolve if this country possess this capability. This slide shows the country, I think 19 countries, who started to pursue nuclear weapons or explore nuclear weapons, but stopped. So all of these countries started their interest and then stopped. And then we classifying them in terms of why. Why did they stop? So some of them stopped because of multilateral effort. Some of them stopped because of bilateral effort, for example, US 123 agreement, or some domestic decision, and so on. But one of the major reasons why this country stopped is bilateral non-proliferation, mainly US 123 agreement, the blue ones. Mainly United States bilateral effort stopped this country from pursuing nuclear weapons. Now, this is again something that you cannot really see well, but then these are the connections between importers and exporters. So who is having the maybe most frequent connection among the countries who wants to have a nuclear power as an exporter? As we all know, China and Russia. If you look at this carefully, now Russia and China has the densest connection with the potential importers. So now Russia, China potentially posed as the dominant exporter with newcomer countries with questionable commitment to non-proliferation or norms. And with this potential connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons, will the history be repeated or we are getting into a new kind of year? This slide is from Lawrence Quinn. She showed the public interest in nuclear weapons development. Again, without getting into the details, many countries public believe that they want to have nuclear weapons, though they deserve to have nuclear weapons. So there are plenty of countries out there with basically simple public taste toward having their indigenous weapons capability. So without, again, going through all the details, we have many ways of managing this potential connection. We have done many things in the past, but given the uncertainty in the future, I want to focus on this. Can we detect this effort? And then maybe followed by maybe some sort of an international effort at the early stage, meaning, again, coming back to my earlier interest, can we have a predictive capability to understand what is going on in different countries? So this paper was part of my presentation in my 2009 seminar. This was basically statistical analysis using some of the data, but then this analysis was already made by a number of political scientists. What we did here was adding more variables from the supply side. Because we are engineers, we understand maybe what kind of materials and technologies are important. So we added more variables from the supply side and did something. And of course, the model is not very robust. The results are very tricky. So we're not happy. And then I think at that time, Professor Potter asked me, do you see a promise of in this direction? And I wasn't sure. And then I think recently this interest from the Political Science Committee on predictive capabilities was revived. I think Mark Bell, Jeffrey Kaplow, and then Eric Gartsky, I think they have also examined this issue. And I think Kaplow and Gartsky have come up with a report saying something about statistical learning method as a part of predictive capability. And they used support vector machine to test some of this. But then we thought maybe we should take one step further. So these days we hear a lot about deep learning, AI, and so on. I'm sure Yang Liang has been studying on this issue a lot. We wanted to examine if this deep learning capability can make a difference. So we add all the variables that has been examined and identified as potentially important variables. And then this is another piece of work that we did with Philip Baxter and then Justin Hastings. Philip Baxter was a student of Adam Stulberg at Georgia Tech. He did studies on social network analysis as a potential indicator development for proliferation country. So we examined that same using North Korea's data, dividing them into 3 different periods. Because we are relying on the open literature, we have to have enough journal articles. So we started from 1974 when North Korean people started having publications until the first Korean nuclear crisis, 1994. And then between 1995, onset of agreed framework until the first nuclear weapon test, and then beyond. So between these 3 stages, do we have differences in the network in terms of researchers, in terms of different category of researchers or institutions? But I think without, again, understanding the details, as time progresses, this network has become closer and denser. So maybe we ought to extract some data from this and then utilize it as part of our prediction. So we looked at the basically diameter of the node, the centralization or density of the edge and clustering, all those data as part of this simulation. It was fortunately also developed to somebody as part of his dissertation, Philip Baxter. This shows the network difference between Iran and Pakistan. Iran's network is very large, but not focused. So it indicates strong ties focused on scientific investigation, but not focused on nuclear fuel cycle, something specific to weapons related. So Pakistan's work is very much dense and more effective and efficient compared to Iran. And I think maybe this kind of data can also shed maybe a lot more insights to this. So we added that as part of our database, along with all the determinants we have identified, and then ran the model. Again, this time we are using deep learning, so multi-layer perceptron, and then showed accuracy is reasonable. For explore level, maybe it's like 85%, but then explore is always very tricky. The boundary between initial interest of the weapon versus government activities in civilian power sometimes vary. So it's very hard to classify whether this is really the initiation of explore and so on. And then we also examine the use of different statistical models. So multi-normal logic, support vector machine, nearest neighborhood, and so on. And then basically this multi-layer perceptron approach has the best, but with some limitation, especially with the explore stage, early stage prediction. And then we use that to predict. So predict meaning we eliminate the data from North Korea and then use this model and see if the model can predict what North Korea went over in the past. Not quite correct for the initial stage, but later stage, maybe it's repeating what the data, the classification by Joe and Garsky or Philip Lick is telling us. Same thing with Iran. But then we were not very happy about this, maybe not a good job in terms of early stage. So one more question. What about the trade, international trade? Will the addition of international trade aid make a difference in making predictions on this? So this is sort of our latest work. So this is something that we are currently pursuing through technical journal. And then on the revision, I mean, we have revised the paper and then it is reviewed again. So we have added many variables, including nuclear trade data. And then are we using machine learning and deep learning and then traditional methods and so on. But this involves big data. So it's very, it's 100 terabytes of data, very difficult to run this kind of data using a model. So we have to basically concentrate or compress the data, and then do some sort of a big data analysis kind of technique. And then we found the capability has been improved. So for explore, pursue, acquire all levels, we can achieve more than 95%.
Sorry, this is just based on trade data?
Oh.
No, this is
All
the whole
data.
model with
All
trade
the
data.
data
Okay.
except the nuclear network data.
Okay.
So this one doesn't include the social network analysis data, the 4 variables that we included in the previous paper. But except that we included all the other variables. And then maybe the use of trade data is maybe a useful one, and then we were able to predict what was going on earlier stage in North Korea, and also in Iran case. So from this one, we also found that there are some things. Oh, sorry, I think there's one more slide. Oh, sorry, one more slide showing what kind of trade is important. So we found there are like inorganic materials, there are machining tools. I think machining tools in terms of importance, maybe 14%, followed by chemicals and so on, and then nuclear materials and so on. So there are particular materials of particular importance in nuclear trade. So at this point, still this is an ongoing work. So I'm still asking this question to myself. And that goes back to the earlier question Professor Paro asked me 15 years ago. Can this predictive tool be useful at all for real world policy problem on policy making? We're not there yet, but I think with the advent of this AI techniques and big data, and then I think computing powers, maybe we may be getting there. I think the challenge is, this is all yearly compiled data. Colors of war and all this MID data, all these things were compiled and then analyzed and somebody puts it there. We can come up with a way to prepare this data real time. And if we have a way to quantitatively process data, then maybe we have maybe chance to come up with some meaningful predictions. Anyway, I'll stop there. I spent more than 45 minutes.
Thank you.
So let's sort of fly through the slides.
Thank you so much, Mansung. I think what you presented actually requires an entire semester-long course to kind of adequately kind of follow the different slides that you've presented. I mean, I thought I was familiar with the subject matter, but it was even hard for me sometimes to grasp some of the points that you're making. And if we had more time, I would have enjoyed the opportunity to kind of explore a number of the slides that you put up there. And since you also drew upon Professor Blake's work, I'm sure he has comments as well and
I'm
questions.
using his data.
That's right.
In fact, he came to one of our conferences.
In 2016, I just looked it up. Yeah, that was, I think, the only time I've been to South Korea so far.
So I think that I
At
might
the time, Matt Cronin also came.
Oh, I had forgotten that he was there. Okay.
So there are, an awful lot of questions that I would like to ask, but I'm not going to do so at the moment. But I think there's several kind of categories of issues that maybe we wanted to talk about. And I also want to give an opportunity for the large group of experts that we have online here to weigh in here. So I think, one set of issues really has to do with methodology. Because we can talk about, your findings, but then it's a question of, what are the indicators of the concepts that you're using and how to kind of operationalize the issues that you are addressing. And I have some kind of questions, in that regard. Then there's the whole issue of, prediction versus explanation and the relevance of how one kind of examines this in the sphere of at least nuclear proliferation. And I guess I have tried to tackle this from both ends, and I think I tend to come down more on the side of the importance of explanation, which for me means more comparative case studies as opposed to the aggregate data analysis. But others may come to very different conclusions. And then there is the question of the specific cases and how a deeper examination of some of the cases that you have kind of put out there, what they tell us perhaps about both the drivers of proliferation and the impediments, if you will. So I just put that out there as something that we may want to talk about, but I don't want to monopolize the discussion here. And so we may have a chance subsequently to, to pursue some of these questions. But I want to give as many people an opportunity to ask questions. We have, a good 40 minutes or so left for Q&A. So let me, and I'm not going to ask Philip first because I think, well, Philip also will kind of probe in a fashion that may be of interest to you, but may not be as well understood by others around here just because of your investment in writing your dissertation on a related topic. So let me first see if there are other questions, particularly, any of the students who are here, but also other staff members. And I'm looking also on the screen, so I can see many of you there too. Anyone want to start? And if not, then maybe I will. Philip, did you want to weigh in here?
Buy us time for other people to ask questions. Yeah, so I think I recognize you from the KAIST conference. I think that's the last time that we crossed paths, if that's correct. So I had a couple kind of reactions, and I think maybe what I'll do is sort of tee up each of them and see which one engages you, because I've got a couple sort of sets of questions, and they're actually quite intelligible, I think, to everyone. So, I was quite embedded in this quantitative world in the context of my dissertation, and in recent years, I've been much more focused on chemical and biological weapons and non-state actors, but I'm kind of pivoting a little bit back into this space, or at least intending to over the coming year. So I have just sort of two softballs and then a specific question. So the first softball is, I think what makes you really interesting is that you have this technical background. And so one softball is when you're engaging in this kind of social science work, and obviously there's a technical component to the statistical analysis, but do you feel like you have unique insights based on bringing that technical background to do work that people like me or Matt Furman or Matt Kroning or others don't have? So that's one softball, which you may or may not choose to react to. The next one is, there's a lot of data crunching here. And I think one thing that I sort of had the so what question bubble up for me, which is like, say you had a minute or two with a very senior policymaker, and they were like, give me one or two key insights. Like, what are the insights that are generated out of this that maybe are counterintuitive, or maybe they reinforce conventional wisdom? So that's another one. And then the specific question I had is a little bit related to something Bill said, which is, what are the stories here? So the case universe is not very big. And so, for example, there's this fascinating inverse relationship between nuclear power and nuclear proliferation. And it's a little bit unclear in which direction it goes. And I can tell a couple stories about what's going on there. And so it's not very many cases. And so I wonder, tell me about India, tell me about Israel, tell me about Sweden early in the nuclear age. Like, tell me about specific countries and tell me a story. Like, tell me, were the policymakers debating between nuclear power, and did they recognize that as a trade-off? Did they not recognize it, but their investment in nuclear power ended up constraining their nuclear proliferation? I think there's a lot of stories one could tell, and in some respects, at least like in my dissertation, one thing I thought about is, okay, you generate interesting insights from the data, but then it's like, what's the story? Because often there are different stories that are consistent with them. So anyway, that was a lot, so I'll just sort of throw that out there and you can react to any part of it that engages you.
Thanks, Philip.
Excellent point. Very glad to be reconnected to you.
Yeah.
First question. Well, I don't think nuclear engineers have a very different technical insight to the problem. I think we understand that we are doing interdisciplinary educational training here, as well as the program that I ran, and also at Texas A&M. We try to teach engineers policy. We try to teach nuclear engineering to policy students. And I think if they learn enough of the background, I think they can tackle the problem. Maybe some nuances may be important, but not critical in this endeavor. So only because I'm a nuclear engineer does it bring a very different, unique aspects, insights? Probably not. Depending on the problem, maybe. If the problem is becoming very technical, esoteric problem, then maybe. Second question about the
key insights.
Yeah, so this is again a point that Professor Potter asked me, raised earlier when I met. Do we care about these tools? Eventually, we will know. We understand what is going on. And before these tech models or these predictive tools say something, we already understand what is going on. But at the same time, it is of interest to have a tools like this, maybe as a supporting, maybe aid, if it comes down to making decisions. Maybe if supporting tools can verify, validate some of the decisions that we're making. So from that point of view, I think I'm still in the same page. In other words, these models, I mean, we're not talking about causality. We can never say causality in this kind of predictive tools, but we're trying to understand what may be possibly happening. We understand there are some uncertainties. The reason why I'm getting into machine learning and AI kind of things is because of the collinearity, because of heterogeneity built into databases among the independent, seemingly independent variables. They are not independent. They are all connected. Somehow there are some things going on in between. But these nonlinear characteristics cannot be well handled by more typical econometric methods. But if we getting into the multi-layer perception or maybe machine learning or deep learning, these models don't care. These models are built to understand that kind of complex nonlinear behavior, but extract insights. So I think maybe because AI or machine learning or deep learning is still evolving, and people, I think the world is even betting on them, maybe the evolution of this technology could tell us something that we cannot, human intelligence cannot. I think in general, people say human intelligence can handle 20 variables. AI 20,000. So if it becomes a very complex problem, maybe these tools could provide some insights. So today, maybe not, but in the future, if you are dealing with really huge database, something we don't even have today access to, but if we have all this data available, and then if we use these tools, maybe there may be even stories coming from those, but not yet. And at least that's something I'm sort of shooting for. And then the last question was?
The last question was about the stories. Like in particular, there was this interesting inverse relationship between nuclear power and nuclear proliferation. So what do you think of as the stories there? And maybe you want to talk about a specific country, for example. You don't have to. That's what it made me think.
In fact, those stories I'm very much interested in stories. So when I teach, I look at the history and I look at the country and why people started interested in this. For example, North Korea, South Korea, I'm more well-versed in those two countries. And if you look at the bottom line, it started with somebody. It's always a people with some interest, people with some interesting experience or some hardship, personal experience. It amounts to some really big national or historic development. So I think understanding the context and why certain players, certain time made a certain decision, I think it's very important. That's, I think, part of the history and story. And maybe these tools are not capable of handling those stories. So human intelligence still remains a viable option. and I think it's part of this dialogue. But there are also certain aspects that human intelligence cannot intelligently articulate. So maybe there are some complementary roles that different approaches can play together.
Thank you.
If I
So that's, I think, a good response to the complex set of questions that Philip raised, but we may return to this later. But I want to give others an opportunity who may wish to ask a question. Please, Anthony.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not probably an expert yet, but just have a quick question. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. And I have two questions. One more leans to the policy side, and one is more technical side. So for the policy one, when we discussing about like the interrelation between the proliferation and like pretty much like nuclear power infrastructures, which one do you consider will be possessing a higher risk of proliferation when it's come to the technology side? For example, will it be like the technological transfer from the foreign country will actually more capable of resulting in proliferation, or it's more about their domestic will and domestic investment in those research that will possessing that, or at different stages combined? And the second question is about like a technical part. So like, for example, you mentioned there are so many like variables and precursors to predicting in your model. How does these like precursors or variables weighted? Are they assigned manually, or are they assigned through a regressional like model that from the historic data? Because I'm reading right now. Yes.
So your first question, I think, again, goes back to the story. It all depends on the history and story of that particular country. But usually, technical capability is a necessary condition. The sufficient condition is that political decision making. Of course, the political decision making is driven by security situation, domestic politics sometimes. So you're familiar with what I call Sagan-free, others, incentives for nuclear weapons development, prestige, security, the domestic politics. So depending on the country's situation, sometimes the security is driving the country, sometimes prestige is driving the country. In the case of North Korea, I think all those things are driving the country. And then depending on the leadership, the situation of the leadership, different motivation is playing more important. And then I think once you advance in their capability, their motivation also changes. And that is the case with, they started with as a way to secure the regime. But now with the, I think, growing, I think their arsenal, their motivation is changing. Their benefit calculation is changing and so on. So I think it's a time-dependent thing. But usually the political decision making is the dominant, driven by security situation. So the reason why we talked about this newcomer country, if you have countries like Thailand interested in developing nuclear power, I don't see Thailand having any major security concern. But if you're developing this in Saudi or maybe some of the
I don't think so.
sub-Saharan countries, there are potentially subnational threats or regional unrest. Maybe there is potentially concern. So I think, again, depending on geopolitical situation. And then your second question was?
Oh, so speaking of like those factors or the variables that in your model, in the data models, how those things are weighted, like how do they be assigned to values for certain
so it's, if you're using statistical models, you basically run the model, and the model will determine the weights.
so regression?
Yeah, it's a regression based. And then if you're running machine learning and so on, you use those data to train. Typically data sets we have here divided into 60% training, 20% testing, and 20% validation. And then basically that training and so on come up with the weights of these different variables. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Matsu, I'm kind of curious here. Please, I really want to encourage everybody to, you want to?
I just have a question, but please.
Okay, let me just ask a question, and I see Young, and I hope everybody, will then raise their hands to ask. So again, not having had a chance to really carefully examine your different slides, my impression, and it's nothing more than an impression, is that most of the modeling is focused on the drivers rather than the impediments or constraints, and particularly external constraints, which could include everything from export controls, international institutions like the NPT. But I think particularly important in this area is the relationship between the United States and initially the Soviet Union and then Russia, who very actively cooperated to try to dissuade countries who might be interested in exploiting the technology that they had at their disposal from pursuing nuclear weapons. And I think this persisted for a long period of time and in very remarkable ways. I don't think that exists at the moment. And so it's kind of an external factor, which I think was very influential in terms of the outcomes that you discern in your modeling.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist today. So I guess my first question is, to what extent did you focus primarily on the drivers as opposed to the impediments? And in fact, is your ability to predict, would it be enhanced if there was a way to take greater account of the set of factors that may constrain countries, including external factors such as the relationship between the United States and Russia?
Yeah, we do take into account those factors. So in international relations, presence of strong ally, are they nuclear weapons capable? I mean, are they nuclear weapon capable allies and so on? Frequency of militarized disputes, UN voting records, so likelihood of your political maybe orientation, or maybe even regime type. So some of these other factors that we can have a handle on in terms of quantitative quantification, we try to use everything. So some statistical modelers have said, well, some of those variables doesn't make a difference. They're not important. So they trim it down and then come down maybe 10, 20, 10, 12 variables as key. But then Mark Barrett demonstrated that's not really the case. That's a problem with the statistical approach. And statistical approaches are not successfully really identifying the strong indicators of proliferation. So I think we, instead of identifying or cutting down the variables, we try to put everything. Because machine learning, this deep learning will figure it out. If there is any contribution or correlation, deep learning will just figure it out and come up with an answer. So it's a question of whether we can quantify that particular dynamic or relationship or phenomenon. If there is, then we will try to put them in place.
Yeah, no, please.
Thank you again, Professor Yim, for your lecture. I remember your lecture on risks during the NERIC program is one of the more memorable ones for me, and certainly in this case, I think the view that the decision of whether to take certain risks indeed does depend on a person's worldview. But approaching this from a different angle, surely that decision of whether to take a risk or not also depends on how necessary the risk is in the first place. So my question is, do you foresee a point in the future where renewables and battery storage become so cheap and the technology becomes so mature that any proliferation risk associated with nuclear power, no matter how insignificant, according to our regressions, would be very difficult to justify?
There's a question whether we can realize the dream of using renewables to satisfy all our energy needs.
Right.
But at least within my generation or within the foreseeable future, I don't see that happening, because it's the nature, the intermittency of renewable. Because there is a wind, and then there is a cloud, and all these things variable, and the time dependency of those energy source, and also the energy density of those intermittent sources. The factor of 10 to the 8th or 9th compared to renewables versus nuclear power. So factor of 10 to the 8th, 8 orders magnitude or 9 orders magnitude. It's very hard to satisfy all the energy need of human society, especially very industrialized country system. We are very concentrated, high level energy is needed. Renewable energy simply at this point cannot deliver that. So it's an unfortunate reality that this really benign natural technology forces can provide what we need. So will we ever get to that? If we can come up with a meaningful technology for energy storage. So if we can come up with a storage technology that can cover what we need, then yes, But then I think the storage capability we're talking about at this point is megawatts or tens of megawatts, not at gigawatt scale. Countries' electric grid size is typically tens of gigawatts, or maybe even hundreds of gigawatts. So the best technology we currently have is 100 megawatts, maybe gigawatt, but that is not enough to cover government countries' need. And then your cost. I think just for the case of South Korea, if we want to store 1 day electricity need for the country, we have to spend $75 billion. And assuming 15 years of life, that means every year you have to, how many billions of dollars every year to store just 1 day electricity for the country. It's just simply not making any economic sense at this point. So maybe if there is a breakthrough, I know some scholars, including people over the Stanford people, they're working on state-of-the-art storage technology, but I don't know if they will really come up with a breakthrough or silver bullet to address that. So within the foreseeable future, I don't see that happening. Then whatever technology, like nuclear or something, will probably play an important role. But then under the current climate, under the current political climate, I think there is enough push for nuclear power. As you know, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all buying or building nuclear power, SMRs, even though these technologies are not commercially available, indicating the different aspects of energy need from this industry. They want something very secure because the risk management demands very stable, robust outcome of the investment. I think with that kind of culture, it'll be difficult to, I don't know, maybe 100 years, we may come up with a new technology that is capable of storing electricity for societal demand. Not sure.
Thank you. Please, yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. This might not be the area of your expertise, but I was just wondering your opinion. So when we discuss the nuclear energy and the public perception, we usually see the opposition, and the popular reasons for that is the waste management or the environmental impacts. But I was just wondering right now, do you think this intrinsic connection between the nuclear energy and the weapons capabilities could be one factor that shapes the public opposition for the nuclear energy, or it doesn't have any relevance?
I think there is a connection. And Stephen Herzog, I think he's investigating this issue. And at least for this country, there is a connection. Maybe we want to do something similar studies, maybe in countries like South Korea, Japan. There may be a connection. But then the issue of waste management, it's again related to worldview. If you are egalitarian, you are opposing any risk, environmental risk, non-voluntary imposed risk. Nuclear power and then the risk from nuclear waste is all involuntary imposed risk without knowing what is going on. So people are definitely against those things, and same thing with nuclear weapons. So there is a connection. So in terms of addressing the challenge in public perception, maybe examining those issues may altogether help sharing some additional insights. By the way, I'm also, initially I started more as an expert in nuclear waste management. So waste management was my initial focus, but I moved on from nuclear waste to more broader issues. If you're interested in, I have written a book on nuclear waste, and there is a chapter dedicated to the social aspects, perception aspects of nuclear waste.
It's interesting. I maybe in the future I'll ask people to identify themselves, but Genetic comes from Turkmenistan. And for the Central Asian states who created a nuclear weapons-free zone in the region, it was probably more environmental considerations rather than security considerations that explained the negotiation of that treaty. So
what prompted me to become a non-traditional engineer at this point is the environmental concerns. Environmental concern with the power.
thanks. Other questions?
We have a hand online.
Okay, who is that who has their hand up? And then I'll ask Glenn if he wants to I can't see a hand.
Is there more?
I think George.
George Moorhead is, George, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead, George.
Mensung, first let me ask, in your analysis, did you consider the use of reactor-grade plutonium for nuclear weapons? And if not, what impact do you think that might have?
So we have not looked at the use of reactor-grade plutonium as part of the modeling, because I think the models don't have that. I mean, the data that goes behind this simulation models don't have that granularity to its different type of materials, to see the different type of materials as part of nuclear capability. But that's an interesting point. Whether this country have access to reactor-grade plutonium versus weapons-grade plutonium, a type of different kind of nuclear materials, does it make a difference? Maybe an interesting question, maybe we could consider. Even I think Professor Hacker here, he indicates that this emergence of interest in HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, is potentially of a concern. So I think that problem that you're raising, George, maybe something that we need to maybe spend some time on, especially for the future development of nuclear power. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. My ears perked up early on when you showed the Mary Douglas, Aaron Wildofsky, risk it culture slide. It sort of threw me back to my graduate days with Aaron Wildofsky. I guess I immediately thought, oh, that would be kind of an interesting way to examine nuclear proliferating decision making. But I never saw what you did with that. So in your study, do you conclude that risk and culture, Douglas-Wildofsky model is helpful, explanatory in some ways, or it's just a dead end rabbit hole? What did you end up doing with that?
I think it's a very interesting question. I haven't done anything major, but I have an interest in examining that issue. I'm very early stage of questioning that. I will be interested in maybe talking with you on this possibility to furthering this understanding.
I mean, it would be a very interesting conversation to have. I've never studied the I read about this, but never done any research myself on the
For example,
decisions for.
Even there are some studies or reports, a collection of information out there characterizing different countries' culture. IBM has done that. So you have cultural data on different countries, classifying different countries. Will that cultural understanding make a difference? I haven't looked at it, but maybe there is some utility of those kind of.
Well, and what's interesting with the way they do it, and this is 40 years ago now, is by having universal cultures, right? Hierarchical cultures, individualistic cultures, egalitarian cultures, that sort of thing. They're 5 basic cultures. It gets away from what's oftentimes sort of sloppy political culture arguments about, well, this is just the way the Iranians think, or this is the way it happens in Russia, or some big, broad, very kind of loosey-goosey definitions of culture. And they have, again, a much more specific thing, which, again, I just thought, hey, that might be an interesting way to kind of think about proliferation decisions within regimes, because it focuses on individual leaders and, in this case, sort of a small regime group that might share one of these universalistic cultures. And if so, why? Does it have anything to do with the threat assessment that brings them to power? Something else entirely. So I'm just interested in what you did.
In fact, when Bill asked me, so what is your title, seminar title? Until that point, I didn't think about this as a seminar title. I was going to say something about something different. And then I asked myself again, I'm coming back to Monterey. And the original seminar that I was thinking about doesn't really resonate with the interest in this crowd, and then something I already done in the past. Maybe I need to connect them. So after you guys asked me that question, I started thinking, and then okay, maybe I come back to this question. And then, so I was going through some of this literature and some of my own work and then try to put them in a more coherent fashion. Maybe I didn't do a good job, I guess. I just put many different things into this one talk. But then that thought came up also. But the worldview is maybe the reason why different countries behave differently and then they interpret things differently. But I haven't thought about it seriously. But then I thought maybe this is an interesting twist that I need to think about. I just threw in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions that we have for our distinguished guest? I think it's really impressive, Monsung, as an engineer tackling these questions. I mean, I asked myself as a political scientist, what kind of questions would I be able to explore in the nuclear engineering sphere? I don't think it's a very large universe of cases. So I really think that, your curiosity and the expertise that you bring to bear on these topics is important. And I think one of the reasons why we have perhaps more faculty members at this seminar than usual is that there's a great interest on behalf of the Middlebury Institute and particularly the Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies program in collaborating, with your school. And so I really look forward to your return visit as a means to kind of develop where we may be able to collaborate and we can learn more about the science and technology, and perhaps we can offer something on the policy side to your students. So
Yes, I do look forward to having that opportunity. So I'm at this point, I've been in this side of the world now 2.5 months or 3 months. So I just started my new position. And that for us to do anything meaningful, you'd always need resources. So that's what I primarily spend my time on. Can I come up with something that will make this thing happen? So maybe within the next several months, maybe we'll come up with an answer.
we will certainly try to join you in that effort. So I would ask all of you to join me in thanking our very distinguished professor.